They called her Grandma behind her back. Sometimes, when he was feeling particularly cruel, Dr. Preston Sterling would call her Dusty, not knowing the name's hallowed origins, but because he thought she looked like something best swept into a corner and forgotten. He'd placed a $500 bet in the nurses' station that Sarah Miller, with her quiet voice and trembling hands, wouldn't last a month at St. Jude's Medical Center. The younger nurses, like Brittany Moore, would giggle nervously, caught between the magnetic pull of his arrogant charm and the faint, prickling shame of their own complicity. The security camera footage from that Tuesday night during the witching hour would later capture the exact moment the world tilted on its axis. 1 second, it was the controlled hum of Boston's most prestigious trauma unit, a sterile ballet of beeping monitors and quiet efficiency. The next, it was pure, unadulterated chaos, a maelstrom of sound and fury that would either destroy Sarah Miller completely or reveal the truth she had spent 5 years trying to bury. They took her ID badge, the plastic rectangle that represented 2 decades of service in a profession she loved. They handed her a flimsy cardboard box and told her she was finished, fired for gross insubordination and assault. After a lifetime spent saving lives in the worst places on earth, Sarah Miller, a small woman with graying hair and a noticeable limp, was being thrown out onto a rain-slicked Boston street for the crime of doing her job too well. She stood under a flickering street lamp, the cold October drizzle soaking through her thin scrubs, and thought her life was finally, irrevocably over. She was wrong. Hours later, a 4-star general would stand before a bank of television cameras, his voice cutting through the stunned silence of the hospital lobby. He would hold up a classified black folder and say, his eyes finding Sarah in the crowd, "You just told the nation that this woman was fired for instability. You told them she was incompetent. It's time to correct the record. It's time you learned who you just tried to destroy." Because true heroism often goes unnoticed until it is the only thing standing between life and death. And sometimes, the quietest person in the room is the most dangerous. For 3 weeks, Sarah Miller had been a ghost haunting the gleaming corridors of St. Jude's. She moved with a deliberate, plotting pace that drove the residents, high on caffeine and their own burgeoning importance, to the brink of insanity. Her hands, when they were not actively engaged, possessed a faint rhythmic tremor, a subtle vibration that Dr. Preston Sterling found endlessly amusing. He saw it as a sign of age, of creeping neurological decay, of incompetence. "Sarah, could you check the expiration dates on the saline bags again?" He'd called out across the trauma bay just that afternoon, his voice booming with performative authority. "We can't have our patients dying of sepsis just because Grandma forgot how to read a label." A few of the younger staff snickered. Brittany Moore, a nurse barely out of her 20s with expertly applied makeup and an ambition that glittered in her eyes, shot Sarah a look that was a cocktail of pity and condescension. Sarah didn't respond. She simply nodded, her expression unreadable, and turned to the supply closet. The tremor in her hands stilled the moment she gripped the plastic-wrapped bags, her movements becoming fluid and economical. She had already checked them 10 minutes ago. She moved the way she did everything, methodically. It was a slowness born not of age, but of precision honed in environments where a misplaced finger or a moment's haste meant the difference between a pulse and a body bag. The limp in her right leg, a slight but constant hitch in her gait, was a souvenir from a mortar blast in Kandahar that had shattered her knee into a puzzle of bone and cartilage. The tremor in her hands was a phantom echo of the 6 consecutive hours she had spent with her entire body weight pressed onto a young ranger's femoral artery, the boy's lifeblood pulsing against her palms as an IED's dust settled around them. She had refused evacuation, her own shrapnel wounds bleeding sluggishly, until a surgeon could take her place. The nerve damage was permanent. It was the price of a life saved. Here, at St. Jude's, it was just a punchline. "I'm telling you, she's a liability," Sterling had declared later, leaning against the nurse's station counter, smoothing the lapels of his pristine white coat. Underneath, he wore a tailored suit that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly salary. His stethoscope was draped around his neck, not like a tool, but like a piece of expensive jewelry. I spoke to my father about it last night. He agrees. You can't have people with those kinds of deficiencies working in a top-tier trauma center. It's bad for the hospital's image. His father was Senator William Sterling, a man whose name was literally carved into the stone of the hospital's new surgical wing. That fact was the bedrock upon which Dr. Sterling had built his kingdom. He was handsome in a sharp, jagged way, with a jawline that belonged on a movie screen and an ego that took up more space than the hospital's MRI machine. He was chief of surgery at 34, a prodigy by any measure, but his knowledge was textbook deep, sterile, and untested by the visceral reality of true chaos. Brenda O'Brien, the charge nurse, looked up from her charting, her face a mask of weary cynicism. Brenda had arms like a dock worker and a gaze that could curdle milk. She had survived pandemics, budget cuts, and 3 hospital-wide strikes. She had 0 patience for incompetence, but even less for arrogance. "She's a certified trauma nurse, Preston," Brenda said, her voice flat. "Her paperwork is spotless. She's just quiet." "She's slow, Brenda," Sterling countered, a smirk playing on his lips. "And shaky. I'm just being cautious. Human resources keep sending us these charity cases, these veterans. It's a noble sentiment, I suppose, but this is the big leagues. My 500 says she's gone before her probationary period is up." He winked at Brittany, who blushed and quickly looked down at her phone. Sarah heard it all. She was in the alcove, restocking the intubation kits, her movements still measured and sure. The words were meant to carry, to humiliate. They landed on her like spent cartridges, heavy and useless. She had been called worse things by better men. He was a mountain of a man, a former college football player whose imposing size belied a gentle spirit. He saw more than most. "Don't let him get to you, Sarah," he murmured, his voice a low rumble. "Kid's got a silver spoon so far up his backside it's a wonder he can walk straight." Sarah offered him a small, tired smile. "I'm fine, Mike. Just doing my job." She continued down the hall, the rhythmic pop of her bad knee a quiet counterpoint to the steady beeping of the telemetry monitors. She was just a nurse, an old, slow, tired nurse. That's all they saw. That's all she wanted them to see. It was safer that way. If you're already hooked by this story of justice, go ahead and hit that like button right now. It really helps us share more stories of everyday heroes who refuse to back down. Now, back to Sarah Miller's story, because what happened next changed everything. The alarm didn't just ring, it screamed. A klaxon, harsh and insistent, tore through the relative quiet of the 2 a.m. shift. The overhead lights flickered, then bathed the entire emergency department in a pulsating, hellish red glow. Code Black! Code Black! Trauma Bay 1! ETA 2 minutes! This is not a drill! A voice crackled over the intercom, tight with panic. The atmosphere in the emergency department shifted instantly, the air crackling with a sudden, violent charge. Code Black was the hospital's designation for a mass casualty event with a military or federal component. It meant lockdown. It meant chaos. It meant the kind of medicine that separated the competent from the credentialed. Dr. Preston Sterling, who had been loudly recounting a story about sailing with a congressman, straightened up, a predatory gleam in his eyes. This was his stage. This was his time to shine.
"All right, people, let's look alive," he bellowed, striding towards Trauma Bay 1. "I want full trauma panel, blood on standby, surgical suite prepped. Park, Reynolds with me. Brittany, I want you on vitals. Brenda, manage the floor. And you." He pointed a finger at Sarah, who was calmly securing a patient's IV line. "Stay out of the way. Go restock the crash carts or something. I don't want your shaky hands anywhere near my patient." Before Sarah could even register the insult, the world outside the hospital exploded. A low thrumming that had been vibrating in the floorboards escalated into a deafening roar that pressed against the chest of everyone in the building. Thwop, 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 thwop. It was a sound Sarah knew in her bones, a sound that tasted of grit and adrenaline. It wasn't the familiar whine of a civilian medevac helicopter. It was the deep, guttural beat of a Black Hawk. 2 of them. Through the plate glass windows of the ambulance bay, they saw the impossible. One of the massive, olive-drab machines was descending with terrifying precision, not onto the rooftop helipad, but directly into the street intersection outside the emergency room doors. Its downdraft sent trash cans rolling, inverted umbrellas, and made the reinforced glass of the hospital rattle in its frames. The second Black Hawk hovered above, a menacing guardian angel, its searchlight cutting a stark white cone through the drizzling rain. Simultaneously, the street was flooded with a symphony of sirens. Black SUVs with government plates screeched to a halt, boxing in the intersection. Men in dark suits and military police in full combat gear spilled out, weapons drawn, creating a perimeter. The red and blue lights of their vehicles washed over the scene, painting it in frantic, strobing flashes. The automatic doors to the trauma bay burst open with a force that nearly tore them from their hinges. 2 paramedics, their faces pale and strained, wrestled a gurney through the opening. Flanking them were 4 heavily armed military police, their eyes scanning the room with a cold, tactical efficiency. "Male, late 40s, multiple GSWs to the chest and abdomen. BP is 80/40 and dropping. Pulse is 130 and thready. He's been losing consciousness," one of the paramedics screamed, his voice raw. On the gurney lay a man built of corded muscle and raw power, even in his current state. His face was ashen, beaded with sweat, his jaw clenched against unimaginable pain. Blood soaked through the hastily applied field dressings on his chest. Sterling surged forward, radiating an aura of supreme confidence. "Get him in the bay. Let's go, people. I'm the Chief of Surgery, Dr. Preston Sterling. This is my patient." He began barking orders, a rapid-fire litany of medical jargon. "Get me 2 large-bore IVs, type O neg, hang 4 units. Let's get these dressings off. I need to see what we're dealing with. Someone get me a chest tube tray. Park, I want you on suction. Reynolds, get ready to push meds on my order." The team, a well-oiled machine under his command, jumped into action. They swarmed the gurney, cutting away the man's tactical gear and clothing. The room filled with the metallic scent of fresh blood and the frantic beeping of monitors as they hooked him up. Sarah stood near the wall, just as she'd been ordered, her hands clasped behind her back. She wasn't restocking carts, she was observing. Her gaze wasn't on the dramatic, bloody wounds on his abdomen that had captured all of Sterling's attention. Her eyes were fixed on the patient's neck and upper chest. The numbers on the monitor told a story Sterling was too busy to read.
The patient's oxygen saturation was plummeting. 88%, 85, 80. "He's crashing! VTAC!" Brittany yelled, her voice high with alarm.
"Push 1 of Epi and 100 of Lido," Sterling commanded, his focus still on trying to pack a deep bleeder in the man's lower quadrant.
"Get the pads on him! Charge to 200! But Sarah saw it. It was subtle, a detail easily missed in the chaos, but to her it was as loud as a grenade. The man's trachea, the very line of his windpipe, was no longer in the center of his neck. It was deviated, pushed almost 3 centimeters to the left. His neck veins were distended, bulging like thick ropes under the skin. And as a resident tried to palpate his chest, Sarah saw the faint, crackling puffiness of subcutaneous emphysema, air trapped under the skin. He had a tension pneumothorax. A collapsed lung was pumping air into his chest cavity with every desperate breath, crushing his heart and his good lung. The gunshot wounds would kill him in 10 minutes. The air in his chest would kill him in 60 seconds.
"Doctor?"
Sarah's voice was quiet but cut through the noise with an unnatural clarity. Sterling ignored her. "Charging! Clear!" The man's body jumped on the gurney as the electricity shot through him. The heart monitor blipped back to a weak, thready rhythm, but the O2 sats continued to fall. 75%. "Dr. Sterling?" Sarah said again, her voice louder this time, raspier. She took a step forward. "I said stay back!" Sterling snapped without looking at her. "This is a critical situation. I don't have time for nursing suggestions." "Look at his neck," she insisted, her voice dropping into a command tone she hadn't used in 5 years. "His trachea is deviated. He has no breath sounds on the right side. You're focusing on the wrong injury." Sterling finally whipped his head around, his face a mask of pure fury. His authority had been challenged in front of his team, in front of the military police, in the middle of the most high-profile case of his career.
"Are you deaf?" he snarled, his voice dripping with venom. "Or just senile? I am the chief of surgery at this hospital. You are a nurse. A new, barely competent nurse with hands that shake like a leaf in the wind. You will get out of my trauma bay right now, or I will have security drag you out, and I will personally see to it that you never work in this city again." He took a step towards her, his 6-foot frame looming over her small one, using his physical presence to intimidate. "Get out." The patient's lips were turning a dusky, terrifying shade of violet. The monitor let out a long, continuous, high-pitched tone. Asystole. Flatline. "He's flatlining!" Brittany screamed, her hands flying to her mouth. Sterling's face went pale. He froze. For one fatal second, the arrogant prince, the Harvard prodigy, the senator's son, was just a scared doctor in over his head. He stared at the monitor, his bravado shattering like glass. In that second, Sarah Miller made a choice. It wasn't really a choice. It was an oath she had sworn. Not to a hospital administrator, but to every soldier she had ever treated. The patient comes first. Always. She moved. It wasn't the slow, limping shuffle they were used to. It was an explosion of coiled energy. In one fluid, terrifying motion, she closed the distance between the wall and the gurney. Sterling, turning back to the patient, found her in his path. He put a hand out to shove her away. "I said get—" He never finished the sentence. Sarah didn't push him. It was a tactical block, something learned in a dusty Krav Maga training room at Fort Bragg. She dipped her left shoulder, planting her feet, and met his shove with a rigid frame. Her elbow connected with his solar plexus with a sickening thump. It wasn't a strike, but a perfectly executed block that used his own momentum against him. The air rushed out of Sterling's lungs in a shocked whoosh. He stumbled backward, gasping,
tripping over a discarded supply tray and crashing to the floor in a heap of wounded pride and expensive tailoring. The room went deathly silent, save for the single, horrifying tone of the flatlining monitor. Sarah didn't spare him a glance. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't check a chart. She bypassed the scrub line and her hand shot out, not to the neatly organized surgical tray, but to an open supply pack on a nearby cart. Her fingers, the same fingers Sterling had mocked for their tremor, closed around a 14-gauge angiocath, a long, thick needle. She turned back to the patient. Her left hand, now rock-steady, landed on his chest. Her fingers, moving with the unerring certainty of a master craftsman, found their mark. Second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. It was a motion she had performed 1,000 times in the back of bucking Blackhawks, in the dark, with mud and blood on her hands.
Dr. David Park, a young resident, watched, his mouth agape.
"What is she doing?" he whispered, horrified. "That's not the protocol." Brenda O'Brien just stared, her eyes wide, as if she were seeing Sarah for the first time. Sarah ignored them all. She palmed the needle, aimed it perpendicular to the chest wall, and with a firm, controlled thrust, drove it deep into the patient's chest, just over the top of the third rib. The sound was audible throughout the silent room. A loud, definitive hiss. It was the sound of trapped air, pressurized and desperate, escaping the prison of the man's chest cavity. It was the sound of a heart being given room to beat again. On the monitor, the flat line blipped. It wavered, then resolved into a weak, ragged sine wave. Ventricular fibrillation. "Pads," Sarah commanded, her voice the cold, flat steel of a scalpel. She didn't shout. She didn't have to. Her authority was absolute, forged in fire and blood. Brittany, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe, slapped the charged defibrillator paddles into Sarah's hands. "Clear," Sarah said. The body arched. The rhythm on the monitor jumped, steadied. Sinus tachycardia. Fast, but it was a beat, a real beat. Simultaneously, the oxygen saturation numbers began to climb. 70, 75, 85, 92, 98. The patient's chest rose and fell, a deep, shuddering, beautiful gasp of air. The violet color receded from his lips, replaced by a healthy pink. He was alive. The entire event, from Sterling's collapse to the patient's first breath, had taken less than 15 seconds. Sarah stepped back from the table, her job done. She peeled off the pair of gloves she had instinctively donned and dropped them into a biohazard bin. The adrenaline began to recede, and now, for the first time, her hands began to tremble violently. She leaned against a supply cart, her bad knee suddenly throbbing, feeling the weight of the years and the wars settle back onto her shoulders. The patient's eyes fluttered open. They were hazy with pain and drugs, but they were lucid. They bypassed the stunned face of Dr. Park, the shocked expression of Brenda, and the furious, humiliated glare of Dr. Sterling, who was just now scrambling to his feet. The patient's eyes found Sarah. They locked onto her, and in their depths there was a flicker not of gratitude, but of pure, absolute recognition. This man didn't know her name or her face, but he knew her kind. He knew the quiet confidence, the brutal efficiency, the calm at the heart of the storm. He was a warrior, and he recognized another. With a strength that seemed impossible, he lifted his right hand from the gurney. It shook, not from weakness, but from a will of iron forcing shattered nerves to obey. He brought his hand slowly, deliberately, to his brow, in a formal, lingering salute. Then, through the oxygen mask, his voice a raw, broken whisper, he spoke a single word, a name. Dusty. The silence in the room became profound. The military police, who had been standing impassively against the wall, stiffened. Their eyes snapped from the patient to the small, tired-looking nurse leaning against the cart. Their expressions shifted from tactical indifference to something akin to reverence. Sterling stared, his face a kaleidoscope of confusion, rage, and dawning horror. What? What the hell did he just say? What is going on? Sarah met the dying soldier's gaze and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "At ease, Commander," she said, her voice soft again. "You're safe now. Let us work." The commander's hand fell back to his side. His eyes closed, his body finally relaxing, surrendering to the care of the one person in the room he trusted implicitly. Incredible, right? If you want to see more stories where the underdog becomes the hero, subscribe to this channel right now and ring that notification bell. Also, comment below with your best guess about what happens to Dr. Sterling. Because trust me, his downfall is going to be spectacular. Let's continue. The spell was broken by the sound of Sterling's sputtering rage. His face, which had been pale with shock, was now a blotchy, furious red. The humiliation of being so effortlessly neutralized and so thoroughly upstaged in his own trauma bay had curdled into venomous fury. "Security!" he shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Sarah. "I want security in here now! She assaulted me! She performed a dangerous, unauthorized procedure on a patient. She is a menace. She's fired. Do you hear me? Fired!" Two hospital security guards, drawn by the code black, appeared at the doorway, looking uncertain. Their authority seemed flimsy and theatrical, compared to the grim-faced military police already in the room. Administrator Harold Henderson scurried in behind them, his face slick with sweat. He was a man who lived in mortal fear of lawsuits and bad press, and the scene in front of him was his worst nightmare. A high-profile military patient, a lockdown, and the son of a powerful senator on the floor, screaming about assault. "What in God's name is happening here?" Henderson demanded, his eyes darting nervously between Sterling, the patient on the table, and the heavily armed soldiers. This nurse," Sterling spat the word like poison, "attacked me, and then stabbed the patient in the chest with a needle. She's unstable. I was handling the situation perfectly until she interfered. She could have killed him." Brenda O'Brien stepped forward, her arms crossed over her broad chest. "That's not what happened, Harold. The patient was flatlining. Sterling froze. Sarah saved his life." "She saved his life by shoving the chief of surgery to the ground?" Henderson squeaked, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. He saw the situation not through a medical lens, but through the distorted prism of liability. He saw a decorated surgeon with a powerful father versus a probationary nurse with a spotty in-hospital record of being slow. The calculation was simple and brutal. "Dr. Sterling," Henderson said, his voice oozing a placating sympathy. "Are you all right? Do you need medical attention?" He turned to Sarah, his expression hardening into one of cold, bureaucratic fury. "You. My office, now." One of the military police took a half-step forward, his hand resting near his sidearm. "Sir, with all due respect, that nurse—" "This is a civilian hospital and a civilian matter," Henderson snapped, emboldened by his decision. "Your commander is stable, thanks to Dr. Sterling's quick work." He shot a meaningful look at Sterling, a silent pact of mutual self-preservation being forged. "Now, I will handle my staff." Sarah said nothing. She looked at the patient, now breathing steadily, his vitals stable on the monitor. She looked at the awestruck face of Dr. Park and the conflicted expression on Brittany's. She looked at Brenda, who gave her a look of furious, helpless support. Then she looked at Henderson. "Fine," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. The walk to the administrator's office was a walk of shame. Big Mike Cogan was the one tasked with escorting her, his face a thundercloud of anger. He walked beside her, his large presence a silent statement of protest. Nurses and orderlies in the hallway averted their eyes. They had heard Sterling's shouts. They knew what was happening. They saw the price of defying the hospital's golden boy, and they tucked their heads down, praying the lightning wouldn't strike them next. The conference room was all polished mahogany and plush leather, designed to intimidate. Henderson sat at the head of the table, flanked by a stone-faced woman from Human Resources. Dr. Sterling was there too, having changed into a fresh, crisp suit. He had a small, artfully placed bandage on his forehead, a prop for a performance of victimhood he was already rehearsing. The HR director read the charges from a file in a flat monotone. Gross misconduct, insubordination, physical assault on an attending physician, performing an unauthorized and life-threatening medical procedure, violation of the chain of command. Sterling leaned forward. She was unstable. I've been concerned about her since she started. The tremor, the slowness. I believe she had some sort of psychotic break. I was attempting to de-escalate when she attacked me. It was terrifying. I'm pressing charges, of course, for assault, and I'll be speaking to the state licensing board. She should never be allowed near a patient again. Henderson nodded gravely. Sarah Miller, your employment at St. Jude's is terminated, effective immediately. You'll be escorted from the premises. A box will be provided for your personal belongings. Sarah sat perfectly still in the oversized leather chair. She looked small, diminished, a grey-haired woman in wrinkled scrubs. She looked at her hands, which were resting, tremor-free, in her lap. The patient, she said, her voice a quiet rasp. Is he still stable? Henderson blinked, thrown off by the question. What? Yes, Dr. Sterling stabilized him and is preparing him for surgery to repair the other wounds. Sarah nodded slowly. Good. She stood up. She didn't beg, she didn't argue, she didn't cry. The quiet dignity of her acceptance was more unsettling than any outburst would have been. If saving a life costs me my career, she said, looking directly at Sterling, her eyes as clear and cold as a winter sky, I'll pay that price every time. She turned and walked out of the room before they could say another word. Big Mike was waiting for her with a cardboard box. It was the standard, humiliating container for the hastily discarded lives of the fired. I'm sorry, Sarah, he mumbled, his voice thick with anger. This isn't right. It's all right, Mike, she said softly. Just a job. She went to her locker and packed her life into the box. A cracked coffee mug that said, World's okayest nurse. Her worn, comfortable stethoscope. Not a piece of jewelry, but a well-used tool. A small, dying succulent plant she'd been trying to nurse back to health. And at the bottom, a framed photograph of her late husband, handsome and proud in his army dress uniform. 2 decades of nursing, a lifetime of service, all reduced to a box that wouldn't even fill the passenger seat of a car. As Big Mike escorted her to the main entrance, the automatic doors slid open, revealing a world that had turned grey and miserable. The rain was coming down harder now, a cold, persistent downpour that matched the bleakness in her soul. You take care of yourself, you hear? Mike said, his hand on her shoulder. Watch that blood pressure, Eddie, she replied, using his given name for the first time. The doors slid shut behind her with a final, indifferent whoosh. She stood on the street corner, huddled under the inadequate awning of a bus stop. The cardboard box grew heavier with each passing second, its corners softening in the damp air. She clutched it to her chest, trying to protect the photo of her husband from the encroaching wetness. The rain plastered her greying hair to her forehead and soaked through the thin fabric of her scrub. Her bad knee throbbed in a painful rhythm that mimicked the slow, lazy sweep of the windshield wipers on the passing cars. It was over. The thought wasn't angry or panicked. It was just a heavy, suffocating fact.
Her pension was gone. Her career was a crater. Sterling would press charges. The police report, the licensing board review. She'd be lucky to get a job greeting customers at a grocery store. She looked at her reflection in the dark glass of the bus shelter. All she saw was a tired old woman, defeated and alone. No one would ever know what she had done. No one would ever know who she had been. The legend of Dusty Miller, the angel of the Hindu Kush, had died tonight in a sterile Boston trauma bay, slain by the ego of a boy in a white coat. Then she heard it. Faintly at first, a low, pulsing thrum that vibrated up through the soles of her worn sneakers. It was a sound that cut through the city's drone, a sound that belonged to another world. Her world. Thwop, thwop, thwop. The puddles on the pavement began to ripple. The glass of the bus shelter rattled. The sound grew, swelling from a hum to a roar, a physical pressure that vibrated deep in her chest. She looked up, past the blurry streetlights. The clouds tore apart. A Black Hawk helicopter, the same one from before, descended out of the rain-soaked darkness, its landing lights blazing, turning the night into a chaotic, artificial day. It wasn't heading for the hospital. It was heading for the street. For her. Tires screeched. Cars slammed on their brakes, causing a pileup of screeching metal and shattering glass. Pedestrians scattered, screaming, thinking it was a terrorist attack. The helicopter landed, impossibly, in the middle of the intersection 50 yards away, its massive rotors whipping the rain into a horizontal tempest. Simultaneously, the street was sealed. Black SUVs, the same ones from before, materialized out of the chaos, positioning themselves sideways to block all traffic. Their doors flew open, and a dozen soldiers in full combat gear spilled out, fanning out with tactical precision, their rifles held at a low ready. Sarah stood frozen, the rain and rotor wash whipping at her, the soggy cardboard box clutched to her chest like a shield. One of the soldiers, scanning the panicked crowd through a rifle scope, suddenly stopped. He lowered his weapon and pointed. Not at a threat, not at a car. He pointed directly at her. "Target acquired! Target in the rear!" His voice, amplified by his comms, cut through the roar. Another soldier broke from the line and began sprinting towards her, dodging through the gridlocked traffic as if the cars were practice cones. He was young, his face taut with urgency. He reached her, his chest heaving, rain dripping from the brim of his helmet. "Ma'am?" he panted, his eyes wide with a desperate respect. "Colonel Miller! Ma'am, you need to come with us."
"Now!" Sarah just stared at him, bewildered.
"Colonel?" Before she could process it, he grabbed her arm, his grip firm but not rough. "Mom, the general is waiting. Please." From behind the line of black SUVs, a figure emerged. He was an older man, tall and ramrod straight, wearing a simple army windbreaker over his uniform. He didn't run from the rain. He walked through it as if it wouldn't dare touch him. He leaned on a simple black cane, but not for support. He wielded it like a scepter. On his shoulders, even in the gloom, 4 silver stars gleamed. General Thomas Cartwright, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the most powerful military officer in the United States, stopped 10 feet from her. His face, a roadmap of a life spent in service to his country, broke into a weary but genuine smile.
"You are a hard woman to track down, Dusty," he said, his voice a calm, steady anchor in the swirling storm. "Now, let's go fix this mess." And that is how Sarah Miller went from fired and humiliated to a national hero in less than an hour. The story of Sarah Miller is a reminder that true heroism often goes unnoticed until the moment it becomes absolutely necessary. In a world obsessed with titles, status, and bureaucracy, It's easy to forget that the most important people in the room are often the ones doing the actual work. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button right now, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss these incredible stories of justice. And share this with someone who needs to be reminded. Never judge a book by its cover, and never, ever underestimate a nurse. Comment below with your thoughts on Dr. Sterling's fate. Thanks for watching.